So good morning, good afternoon, everybody. When there's presentations in the morning, I usually start off by saying, Weli Etuaptmumk, which means good morning. How about you guys try that? Weli Etuaptmumk. Great. Except it's the afternoon, but we'll... So thank you. For the next half hour, I'm going to be presenting a little bit of my personal view of the Mi'kmaq history in Nova Scotia. When we were talking about this as a team, we thought that it was going to be very important for you to know a little bit more about the Mi'kmaq people before you actually got a chance to hear the presentation that Elder Albert Marshall and Dr. Cheryl are going to share with you this afternoon. It's important because I want to share the real history of our people and what really happened in Nova Scotia, in our backyard. So again, it's a personal view, it's not an official view. It's meant to share, it's meant to educate, it's not meant to point fingers. It's meant for you to learn something to take back with you, and I think it's really important. So if you can just buckle up a little bit, and for the next 25 minutes, I'm gonna roll through a lot of information. And at the end, if there's any questions, you can ask me during lunch, okay? Alrighty. So, Mi'kmaq history in Nova Scotia. So, again, my name is Robert Bernard. I'm from Wegorma First Nation, Mi'kmaq Nation, Ulnu. That's in Cape Breton, and we call it Unumagi. Unumagi, a lot of people refer to it as the land of the fog. So, yeah, it is foggy there. It's snowing right now. So my company is called Diversity Management Group, and I work with Sarah and Rachel, and we do a number of workshop facilitations, and a lot of it recently is centered around educating people about Indigenous views. So here you see a beautiful image that Teresa Marshall from Millbrook I found online. I thought it was a beautiful image to share. So you'll be seeing some of these images as we go along, and this one is called Mi'kmaq Universe. Honoring traditional protocols. Patrick started this morning. We call it a traditional name and place protocol. So welcoming you to the unceded, we never gave it up, traditional and ancestral territory of the Ulnu people. I'm Ulnu. I'm Mi'kmaq, but I'm Ulnu. And this is our Mi'kmaq territory. What does Ulnu mean? So Ulnu relates to the word for tongue, Ulnu, and it connects the language through the tongue. So when we speak our language, we ask each other, Carla, Ulnuizin? And she would say, I'm asking her, do you speak our language? There was actually a really neat recent initiative, Ulnuizi, it's that easy. Some people might have, it's a catchy phrase. But do you speak our language? So Carola would say, Ulnuizi. Yes, I speak my language. Now she's from Etuaptmumk, New Brunswick. It might be a little different over there, but we do have our certain dialects and a little changes, but we understand each other in our regions. What does Mi'kmaq mean? So Mi'kmaq is the plural form of Mi'kmaq. So Mi'kmaq, I'm Mi'kmaq, singular. Mi'kmaq comes from the root word Nigamach, or my family. Those are Mi'kmaq people over there. Mi'kmaq, again, is the singular form from I am a Mi'kmaq person. Key words to remember, Gwe. So Elder Albert used that first thing this morning, Gwe. And we talked about that. It's interesting because when we travel to the next tribal area in Quebec, for example, they say kwe over there. So it's interesting. Same spelling, but they say it twice. Pronounce gwe. Just make sure you don't say go away, which is something maybe our ancestors should have said a long time ago, but it's gwe. But the thing is, it's an old word for hello. Like growing up, I'm fluent, but I'm still learning. Even turning 50, and a really scary moment happened to me. I saw gray hair. I was like, oh my God, it's really happening. But I'm still learning the language. Even something Albert said this morning, it was something new, but something that I heard a long time ago from my parents. So things come back. So it's an old word that wasn't really used when we were growing up. The modern way is a little different. Oh, sorry, I'm going to go back a little bit here. So I want to make sure I credit the images. So on the top, you see Alan Silboy's work, beautiful work. You guys know Alan Silboy? Really cool cat. And this is Thunderchild. It's the petroglyph humans that he works on. Today's way of saying hello in a lot of communities, we ask each other, me dal walain. Me dal walain, which is, how are you? So when I ask someone, typically I won't say, oh, Carla, gwe. I would say, Carla, me dal walain. It's just the way it is. So you may notice I'm really buttering you guys up at the start now because all the heavy stuff is coming soon. But how are you? So, in terms of Mi'kmaq history in Nova Scotia, something happened to my background. What do you need to know? There's 11,000 plus years of history here. And recently, as much as 14,000 has been discovered in parts of New Brunswick with some projects they did in Fredericton, I believe, of the highway. They had archaeological projects that were digs that carbon dated things to 14,000 years. But there's over 800 archaeological Mi'kmaq sites across Nova Scotia. 800. In 1985, the Mercy River Project uncovered 100 Mi'kmaq sites. Just that one project. It was a hydro dam. And they discovered over 10,000 artifacts. Can you imagine 10,000 artifacts, right? So the Mi'kmaq people traveled and lived at different year-round encampment sites, so this is why you would see so many different sites discovered. I'm disappointed with my background there. It's not working, but okay. So we mentioned earlier about the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Well, there's also 7 traditional hunting grounds. Fishing and hunting grounds that extend across Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, PEI, Newfoundland, and the Gaspé region. So a number of them are called Piktuk, Gaspé, which is the Gaspé region, Ebigwitk, which is PEI, Siganitk, eastern New Brunswick area, Sebeganegadig, which people know it as Shubenegadi, Dachumkuk, Newfoundland, and Unamagik, which is Cape Breton. The 7 traditional territories comprises what is known as Mi'kma'ki. Did I forget something?
I think you sure did.
Oh.
Guess what?
Oh, guess
Nova Scotia into the flow, where I'm from.
That's that discussion we had this morning about one was okay. I'm still learning too, see? So Wabanagi is also the territory, the larger territory when combined with Maliseet, Penobscot, and Passamaquoddy tribes across the further Atlantic region. And the Mi'kmaq did not recognize colonial boundaries, only traditional territories. So when you're talking about Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, all of those, that didn't really exist for our people. It was hunting and fishing territories. So the history of the people, the impact of first European contact. Challenges faced back then. Can you imagine our people trying to live a certain lifestyle, a certain way, hunting, fishing, uninterrupted, and then everything changed. Of course, we are a welcoming people. If anyone knows us, we are welcoming. Typically, we don't make trouble unless trouble comes to us. And then, of course, anyone would have to defend your family. And that's just the way it is. But over time, challenges faced, you're looking at failed treaty obligations. So our people did not want war. So we signed treaties. So in those treaties, both sides agreed all of these things would be things that would be done. Many of those things did not happen. And so our people suffered. We did not know the language. The language was written in English. It wasn't written in our language. People did not learn our language, which should have happened. They should have learned about our culture just as much as we were forced to learn about the mainstream European culture. Imagine if that happened back then. and then everyone knew our people and our relationships and our treaties and our culture, it would be so different today. Government had a number of assimilation initiatives on the go for the last couple hundred years. So the question is, do you know the true history of treaties and why they are important in Nova Scotia? Just by a raise of hands, how many people actually know the number of treaties that exist with the Mi'kmaq people in Nova Scotia? 1? 2? How many people have actually tried to read some of the information about the treaties? Cool, that's a little better. How many people learned about the treaties in school? Okay. Now, these are interesting questions because one of the things is, why was this information not shared with the mainstream population in Nova Scotia? Why? Because the whole thing was to get rid of us, and that was the intention of assimilation. It was to change us forever, and it has, and it did. But we are a surviving people. We find ways to keep going, even today. In terms of population statistics, approximately 55 to 60,000 Mi'kmaq now. The stat was about 35 to 40, but recently there's been another 22,000 in Newfoundland that had been added as Mi'kmaq people. So that really jumped our populations in the Atlantic region. 35 plus Mi'kmaq communities, but we are gradually losing our language. Elder Marshall said a prayer in Mi'kmaq this morning. How many people understood? 2 of us in here. So, well, 3 including Albert. But we are gradually losing our language. I would say English is now the dominant language in our communities. And I could say that probably safely across Canada. So our culture has been attacked for many, many hundreds of years. Again, this is not meant to point fingers. It's about educating. It's about sharing. Here's an interesting stat. The Mi'kmaq population grows 4 to 5 times that of the national rate. And that's the same with the Indigenous population across Canada. Yet, reserve land has not been increased in size. Land claim negotiations have stalled repeatedly, but we're growing 4 to 5 times. I did those fancy changes. Okay. Reserve systems. Can you imagine being part of a reserve? How many people have actually been to a reserve? Oh, that's cool. And you guys survived. You're still here. You know, it's interesting because when I was younger, I married a Scottish girl. And it was a tough journey at the start because her dad always made sure he landed 5 to 8. And I was like, why is he landing at 5 to 8? Because he knew an old law that had to have anybody that was not from the community had to be out by 8 o'clock. And I could always try to figure out, like, why is he always coming, like, before 8 o'clock? But these are things that the Indian Act and the colonial ways of, trying to make us fit into, a square, and we live in circles, and we flow like water. And it's about these things that we're forced to live by. So reserve systems. First reserves were established in 1801 in Nova Scotia. That's like, 115, 108, what's the year? 119 years ago. It's 2019 now. Oh, 1801, okay. Yeah, so a long time ago. So Cape Breton became a colony in 1820. Women were not allowed to vote, were not encouraged to vote. Indigenous women were important only to our people. And in our people, our women are very, very, very important. We'll hold them in high regard. Education meant that you were disenfranchised. You were basically thrown out Because you started to know the rules and you could play by the rules, you weren't considered part of the game anymore. So you were kicked out. In Mi'kmaq communities like Membertou, and what they went through, were too close to a growing city. They were evacuated and moved. And that's what happened to Membertou from the Grand Lake Road Reserve. They were put up in the middle of nowhere, and now they're in the middle of the city of Sydney. They actually are growing quite faster than the city of Sydney. The entire Mi'kmaq communities could be moved if towns grew to over 8,000 people. So these are stats, these are things that I was up late looking at last night, actually. It's interesting. It's some information that's being released. The statement, we are all treaty people. We are all treaty people. Why is that statement important? And what does this really mean? Well, our ancestors signed these treaties together. It wasn't a one-sided treaty. It was both sides. Treaties focused on peace and friendship, and they continue to do that today. Treaties were signed between nations. We were not a special interest group. A lot of people still think we're a special interest group. We were a nation. We were a nation that defended our people. We were a nation that went to war. This is why we signed a treaty with the king and queen of, another nation. It wasn't just a simple thing. It was a major thing. The impact of treaties then and now, well, there's a number of treaties that were signed between 1725 to 1763 that prevented further wars. It's totally different back then. Some of these treaties recently were upheld in the courts to protect our access to fishing and hunting rights. So we still live by the Indian Act, which was signed in 1876. On an everyday level, we still live by that. We are attached to numbers by the government. I have a number. Albert has a number. Well, Joe took off, but he has a number too. Meaning that we are all part of this bigger picture of the Indian Act. Again, 5 key treaties were signed, most of those peace and friendship treaties. And here we go. What do you see here? The Shubenacadie Indian Residential School. That's a scary picture. Imagine going to school there. Key impacts that lasted over 50 years in Nova Scotia continue to affect our generations and multi-generations. Loss of connection to family. Loss of cultural connection. Loss of use of language. If you spoke, you were beaten. If you talked to your brother or sister in your language, you were beaten. Multiple forms of daily abuse. Many children never return home. So imagine, many people have children here. Imagine if the authorities came to your home, took your children, you didn't have a choice. You had to let them go. You had to trust the government that they were going to change your children. And some of your children may not return. Some of your children might be staying there for many, many years. This is just the reality of what we've gone through as a people. I see kids here on top bunks praying. Government played a key major role, but religious organizations also played major roles. Traditional spirituality was a target. They didn't want us to continue being and believing in our own spirituality, which a lot of that is actually coming back today and strengthening our people and our spirit. Children were not protected. They weren't. And that has had a multi-generational effect because now their grandparents and their parents and children are still experiencing the losses and the pains and abuse that they've gone through. The losses outweighed the benefits 100 times, 1,000 times. Residential schools in Canada and Nova Scotia, assimilation then and now. Well, they were a form of cultural genocide. That's just the reality. I heard that the apartheid in South Africa, actually somebody mentioned that they'd actually learned from what they did here in Nova Scotia. Isn't that crazy? Now, if that's true, that's cool, but not too cool for us. Took young children from homes. Parents had no choice. Children would be away for years, would never be the same if they came back. Multi-generational effects. So the schools operated in Canada from 1870s to 96. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, there was 94 of them, and they were launched in 2015 to address some of these wrongdoings. They'll continue to do that for probably many generations. TRC recommendations, 94 calls to actions, important lessons learned. I mean, if anybody was even part of that process or saw it on TV or has a friend that went through that, it's pain. And how do you get through it? And you get through it just by trying to forgive and to understand and to move forward. Opportunities for moving forward. Where does the responsibility lie? Building strong relationships and partnerships like we're doing today. It's really important for you to change that story, for you to teach your children, for you to teach your parents sometimes, because they're the ones that taught you, and maybe everything that you know is from them. Well, maybe that whole learning can change. Recovering what is lost, a process that will take many, many years. It's estimated that close to 35% of the current Mi'kmaq population has diabetes now, because one of the things that changed were the diets over the years as well. And in our communities, everything from food, and we're talking about food security and food sovereignty, our food changed. And when our food changed, our bodies changed. And our bodies are still fighting that generationally. And in our communities, I swear, in my community, there's probably close to 50% diabetics. Inactivity levels, heart disease, so many different things. TRC calls of action are an ongoing process for the next number of generations. Okay. So, assimilation, that's another thing that happened. What's that mean? Well, families were forced to move, entire communities were shut down, families with small children were evacuated and sent to centralized locations. So Eskizoni and Shubenacadie were two centralized communities, and that's why they're so big in Nova Scotia. And that happened in New Brunswick as well, and I believe Elsipogtog is a centralized community, if I was to guess. Homes and dwellings were burned. So you were told that you had a place to go, you had some food, possibly a job. When you left, your place was burned. Centralization took place in Nova Scotia from 1942 to 49, and this is pushed by the Indian Affairs Branch federal process. Why did this take place? Government had a fiduciary responsibility to the Mi'kmaq people through the signed treaties. Yet, this is something that they did away from their responsibility. It's like it's like this plan a secret plan that they had, but they never told our people. But we didn't have a choice. Government developed an Indian Act in Canada to govern Indigenous people in 1876, still in effect now. That crazy? 1876. We still have to live by that. So centralization took place 1942 to 49. Government was trying to both assimilate Indigenous people in fewer locations to control them as well. In effect, it was also trying to save money because they had a responsibility to us through the treaties. They figured if we can get them into, a lower number of larger locations, they could save money, but they ended up spending more money, and that's what the statistics say. Interesting. So what do I hope you learned today? Gain a broader knowledge of the history of the Mi'kmaq people in Nova Scotia, learn some of the real challenges that our Mi'kmaq people faced and experienced, have a better understanding about the complexities that have affected the overall quality of life for our people. That's the big thing that's fighting us right now, our quality of life. And how do we change it? I want you to leave here better educated, and also opportunity to improve relations through TRC recommendations. If you could do anything, is to take some time to just even read a piece, a few of them at a time. Some things here, just some history through photos. October 1st every year, Mi'kmaq Treaty Day. These are petroglyphs. The eight-pointed star was found here, right near the Bedford Barren site, depicts the special and ongoing relationship between our people with the stars and the environment, and that still is very strong today. This is also an interesting one that depicts the, it was found at the Kejimkujik Park, but depicts the early European travelers to our Mi'kmaq territory. So these are in stone. This is another interesting thing. Did you know that the Mi'kmaq people had hieroglyphics? So this is the Lord's Prayer in Mi'kmaq. Nuchinen waso ebin jiptuk delusim megidedime waso dlidanen. So I can't read hieroglyphics, but it's the prayer that we are taught. Interesting that I believe there's German on the bottom of this. Can anybody read German? Nobody? But I believe that's what that is. Just some examples for you. Hieroglyphics, the images, some of these compare to ancient Egyptian images as well. The goodness, holy, heaven, full and all, and the exalted one and God. These are similar images that our people had. Here's one of our flags. This version of the Mi'kmaq flag has flown for many generations. Something interesting about this is that, it's funny, Carola and I talked about that this morning, and the Templars, the protectors of the Holy Grail, used a very similar flag during their reign. Don't believe me? Look at this. It's just flipped over. So recent interest, and it was actually on, has anybody seen the Oak Island Mysteries? Nobody's seen that, right? But it actually shows in there our relationship to that whole process. Some key words to remember: Mawiomi, not powwow. Mawiomi is a gathering. Today we're having a Mawiomi. Regalia, not costume. Regalia is traditional dress and wear. This is a traditional ribbon shirt. It's part of a regalia. Wigwam, not teepee. Wigwam is a traditional dwelling. Saramau is a traditional leader, chief. Jibukduk is the name for Halifax, the great harbor. Walalin, thank you, singular. Walalioch, thank you, plural. So we don't usually have a word that we use for goodbye, because we just say nemultas, which means I will see you again. And thank you for your time. I hope you learned something and take something back with you today. Have a great day, everybody.